Hello, Tommy Maguire here. So, of the 100 or so book reviews that I've done over the last few years, you have probably heard me say maybe 2 or 3 times this is one of the best books I've ever read or I've ever listened to. The book I'm going to talk about today is definitely, I think, one of my favourite books, if not my absolute favourite. I've read it twice, if not 3 times. I can't quite remember whether I've read it 3 times or twice. I think it's twice, to be fair. There might be 3. But I've just recently listened to it on Audible. It came out on Audible about a year or 2 ago, which I was really excited to see. I kind of put it off for a little while because I thought, I love this book so much. I'm not sure I'll enjoy listening to it, but what an idiot for thinking that. It is such a good audiobook as well. Absolutely brilliant. King of the Gypsies, Bartley Gorman. So it's called King of the Gypsies, Memoirs of the Undefeated Bare-Knuckle Champion of Great Britain and Ireland. And that's basically who Bartley Gorman was. Sadly, he died in 2002. I think he was 57 or thereabouts. I think he had a short but courageous battle with, I think it was liver cancer. It's really sad, real shame, because there wasn't a hell of a lot of footage of him. There's a little bit on YouTube. There's a quick bit of him at Reggie Cray's funeral being interviewed very briefly. I think the BBC did a bit of a documentary on him, and it sort of shows him sort of shadowboxing outside his caravan later on in life. But apparently he was a lovely guy, principled, kind, decent. But once you've read this book or listened to this book, you'll realise absolutely hard as a nail, basically, just absolutely. And this book works on so many different levels. If you're not interested in fighting, you're not interested in tough guys or any of that stuff, I don't think that matters. There's so much in this book. It's almost poetic the way it's written. There's good times, there's funny times in it, there's heartbreakingly sad bits in it and melancholic bits. There are bits about history, and I think Gypsy history is just really, really interesting. It's just fascinating. It's something that we don't really know enough about, I don't think, because these stories are kind of passed down from generation to generation and they kind of inevitably get lost. It's really kind of romantic in that sense. But Bartley Gorman says at the end of the book that if by the time he got to the end, towards the end of his life, and he became much more of a spiritual man, he says that in the same way his grandfather said to him that if he had his time again, he wouldn't raise his fist to anyone again. And Bartley says the same thing. He makes the point that it really takes its toll on you. And he says that you're even lonely in a crowd. And he talks about in the book how people would challenge you at the most surprising times. You know, they would try and take you by surprise. They'd come for you when you were drunk and all of that. Cheers, Bartley. I've never met you. I probably would have been terrified if I had, but you've had a positive influence on my life. This book is absolutely fantastic. Cheers. Rest in peace. But what a fantastic story. Tyson Fury, if you haven't heard of him, you've been living under a rock. Best boxer in the world at the minute. I think he's fantastic. I absolutely love him. I love the fact that he's sort of cocky and confident, but humble and sort of spiritual at the same time. He just comes across as someone who's just bloody good at what he does. And if you came from his bloodline as well, you'd be pretty bloody tough as well. I can't remember if I'll probably get this the wrong way around now, but I think it's his mother's side. Bartley Gorman was on that side as his great-granddad, I think. His father's side, Uriah Burton. And Bartley talks about Uriah Burton as being the king of the Gypsies. I think he was king of the Gypsies sort of a generation before Bartley. In the story, it explains it much more clearly than I can recall it. But he never fought Uriah Burton, because I think by the time he got to that stage, Uriah Burton was much older and it just never happened. But Bartley had huge respect for him, as did all the Gypsies. He was called Big Just. Look him up as well. I think he did a memoir at one point, which I haven't managed to get hold of, but I'd love to read that. But he's a fascinating character in himself. And that's what makes this book really, really good, is all the characters that Bartley talks about in this book, whether he's fighting them or he's talking about someone that he loves, his brother Sam, who he considered to be the better man, by the way. His brother Sam was 6'5" and about 18 stone, I think. He never fought him. He promised his mum that they would never fight each other, and he never wanted to, I don't think. Whoever he's talking about, whether it's someone he loves or his friends, family, or someone that was after him, the way he paints the picture of those characters is so fascinating. It's so interesting. It's so well done. It was co-written, I think, by Peter Walsh. Let me just check that a minute. Does it say it on here? So I'll edit in afterwards if I'm wrong on that, but I think that's correct. So he's obviously a really good writer, but I think Bartley was naturally a good storyteller. And some stories that he's got to tell for certain. It's just absolutely brilliant. So like I say, even if you don't think you'd be into this kind of book, it works on so many different levels. It's sad, it's funny, heartbreakingly sad at times, to be fair, but it's philosophical. Bartley talks about the fact that he loved debating and talking about life. He loved nature and being in nature, and that was part of being a gypsy and living in the lanes in the country and all of that. It's just brilliant. I could ramble on for ages about this book. I just absolutely love it. It's had a real positive kind of influence on me. And like I say, I've read it about 3 times now, listened to it once. And it's definitely one I will read and listen to again and again for the rest of my life. It's fantastic. So, yeah, you've got the likes of Tyson Fury, like I say, he comes from the bloodline of 2 of the best gypsy fighters ever. So no wonder he's king of the boxing world at the minute. Absolutely fantastic. And like I say, I admire his kind of humility as well. You know, he's cocky and confident because he has to be, because he's a boxer. But he also comes across as intelligent and sort of spiritual and sort of creative as well. He's no idiot, basically. And I just really admire him as well. I think it's fantastic. But some of the people Bartley talks about, one that stands out for me is Henry Francis, who was just a headbutt man, but hard as absolute nails. And Bartley talks about fighting him towards the end of the book, one of his last fights, I think. And unfortunately, Bartley was really drunk at the time. I think he had a smoke on a spliff or something as well. Henry Francis kind of took him a bit by surprise, but he still doesn't complain about it. He still doesn't sort of make excuses. He just says, I think the fight got split up and they never managed to actually finish it. But I think Henry Francis certainly did him some damage. But I still think Bartley would have won overall in the end, to be fair, even though Henry Francis was 10, 15 years younger than him. He's just, you read the book, you listen to it, he just comes across as unstoppable, just ridiculous. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about the book, really. Well, I do, there's plenty I could say, but the review will go on for too long. But the characters in it, fantastic. Look them up. There's loads of gypsy bare-knuckle fighting videos on YouTube. I don't think any of them live up to the picture that you get from listening to Bartley. He talks about how back in his day growing up, it was all about honour. They'd have a fight with their fists. It would finish, they'd shake hands, they'd go away, they'd get drunk, and that was the end of it. It was honour and glory. But he talks about, as he got older and older, more and more people came after him. At one point, a gang of people drive up in cars and trucks, get off with weapons in their hand and just beat the living, just put him in hospital. They basically put him in hospital, him and his brother, from using weapons, which he just says is, what the hell is going on? There's just no honour in that whatsoever. He talks about one time he heard there was a gang of gypsies waiting for him with chainsaws ticking. Again, he just says, what the hell is the point in that, And it's just become too violent. It's taken too far. Which is a shame, isn't it? And it kind of feels like you could imagine that being the case as well. People become, and Bartley sort of says this, they sort of become godless and without religion, and they sort of become bitter and resentful. And no one has the humility to be beaten, I suppose, do they? If someone's tougher than them or better than them and they get beaten, then they'll come back with a weapon. They'll do something to get their own back, to get revenge. And it's that vengeance and that bitterness and that resentment that kind of causes all this stuff. And Bartley makes the point at the end, like I say, how can you be without, how can you kind of transcend yourself? How can you get through life without God, without religion? You have to have that grace. And he talks about having grace and how that keeps him going. And he wants to do more work for charity. He loves children, all that sort of stuff. He just comes across as just a legend. I think he's fantastic. If everything he puts in the book was true, which I think it was, then what a guy, basically. I've got huge respect for him. Wish I could have met him, wish I could have spoken to him, but sadly that's not possible. Like I say, I probably would have been a little bit scared, to be fair, but at the same time, when you think about these people who have left us, it's just such a shame, isn't it? But I think it's fair to say he lived a pretty bright, fast life, like a bright star, burnt out pretty quick, and then he was gone, But fantastic, really good book. Highly recommend it. If any of you read it or listen to it and you've got any comments, I'd be interested to hear what you think, whether you like it or not. I'd be surprised, even if you're not into this sort of thing, that you didn't get something out of it. It's a fantastic book. Cheers, Bartley. Cheers all. See you again soon.